Hey, what's up, guys? All right, so a couple items of business to begin with. Two, actually. Number one, um, I know I've mentioned this in a couple classes, and I've mentioned it, I think, individually to a few of you. But in the off chance any of you didn't get the memo, please bear in mind in the syllabus and other helpful documents section on CourseDen, that other helpful documents isn't a misnomer. The syllabus is there, but if you scroll just below that, there's a couple handouts, like there's one on commas. I'm pretty sure I uploaded that if anybody, for instance, is like really unsure of comma usage. I know that feels like a really lame, nitpicky thing, but there's stuff like that on there, basically, that can help different people out depending on what you struggle with. I've mentioned commas to a few of you, for instance. But the one I want to bring to your attention, it's called Analysis Template. I believe it's right below the MLA template. MLA template also there. Some of you still need that, which is interesting. But the analysis template, if you're the sort to say have lost your notes, or let's be real, didn't take notes ever, which is an interesting decision. The analysis template is like a very, very, very pared down sort of outline of the ways, the structures we talk about when it comes to building a paper. It breaks down those four sort of necessary components of an introduction, the 3 I's when it comes to a body paragraph. It also includes a spot for research material, which we need to use in this paper, right? And honestly, it can just be a nice review for some of you. So it wouldn't take 5 seconds to look at. It's as brief as I could make it. Okay. And if you find yourself just lost in terms of like how to structure some of this stuff, looking over that could really help. Probably a lot of you, actually. So that's there. I also wanted to remind you. Sorry, there's a cat over here. It's really distracting me. He's probably gonna. Yeah, he's coming. The revision is due. There's his tail. At the end of this week. I believe it's the 21st. I'm very bad with dates, but it's the end of this week. So if you're interested in doing that, you still have some time. I would still very much recommend it. It's due on Turnitin. You scroll all the way to the bottom. It's right under where we turned in our first revision. Anyway, okay, I'm going to try to kick him out. Hang on. You got to go. You got to go. I know. Okay. So to jump right into what I want to talk to you about today, you guys, you had some homework over the weekend. I think it was 2 bibs and 2 body paragraphs. The student example I've posted for you did what a lot of you tend to do with assignments like this, and there's all kinds of reasons why. So I totally get it. And basically, they turned in an introduction and a body paragraph. Again, here to be honest with you, I'm totally cool with that. At this stage in the process, I really just want you guys writing. So if you happen to have turned in 2 body paragraphs like I asked for, awesome. If you happen to have only given me 1 and an introduction, because that's kind of how your brain works, I'm cool with that too. Either one is fine with me. And we're going to look at this one. So what you have in front of you, hopefully in front of you, it's on CourseDen if you're somehow confused and you don't know what I'm talking about. As I said, the first paragraph is an introduction. The second paragraph is a body paragraph. We're going to talk about them one at a time. This student wants to write about the James Cameron film Titanic. It's just called Titanic, by the way, not The Titanic. There's a little bit of weirdness in their title. Interesting choice. The movie came out when I was a kid. Kind of surprised that some of you might be familiar with it. It's kind of funny to me because it's kind of a goofy movie, to be honest with you. All that said, I imagine many of you are familiar. If you're not, please Wikipedia the Titanic James Cameron film real quick. Came out pretty sure in the 90s. I know I was a kid, so it had to have been in the 90s. Read through the plot real quick. It's pretty standard, like, oh, I love you type movie. So it's not going to surprise you. Now, all that said, I can pretty readily see, even before I get into their paper, how a movie like that would work for this assignment. So I get it, right? Like we can probably definitely dig into certain parts of the film. All right. So to break down how we're going to do this, number one, again, even if you haven't seen the movie in a while, like I haven't seen it since I was a kid, I had to go look some stuff up. Go look it up on Wikipedia real quick. Pause right here if you need to. I'll give you a minute to pause. Okay, I assume you did whatever you had to do to refresh yourself on the movie or what have you. All right, so the next step is we're going to read through the introduction. And all I want you to do, if it helps, to think about the parts of an introduction like we talked about quite a few times this semester. Try to drum those up either in your memory or in your notes. Hey, your notes. Yeah, I'm having fun. But all I'm concerned with at this stage, I mean this, is argument. You have got to have an argument. You've got to. So all I want you to do, you're going to read through the introduction here in a second. I want you looking for argument. I want you to take an honest minute and, to the best of your ability, without me guiding you, I want you to see where you can pinpoint this student making an argument that requires proof. Okay? Don't unpause the video until you come back with something. Right. I have no way to enforce that. All right, so go ahead and pause. Try to do that, and we'll come back. I'm just waiting here for those people that are real slow on the click. Okay. Hopefully you were able to dig through there, find something. What do we have here? So to begin with, it's a fairly underdeveloped introduction, which is a fancy way of saying it's short on like explanation and just short in general. But again, at this stage in the process, that's not a huge problem. This is another way to think of this assignment. It's like a rough draft, right? So you're just kind of trying to figure out what you're going to talk about at all. It's totally fine. That said, what do we have? What do we accomplish? Where are our arguments? We got one, possibly two, but really one. So one you guys might have picked is this sentence, Jack Dawson and Caledon Hockley, which, like, I had to look up who that was. Like, anyway, those two characters, which are like kind of the two antagonistic male leads in the movie, right? Like Leonardo DiCaprio, Jack Dawson, obviously the good guy because Leonardo DiCaprio. Billy Zane, hell of a name for a guy, is the bad guy, right? Caledon. Anyway, and they're sort of opposed to each other throughout the film, and you're kind of made to, you know, this is the bad guy, Billy Zane, Caledon, he's the bad guy. They say that these two characters in the movie fit society's description of masculinity well. That is an argument, which I guess requires proof. I don't think it does. And a good test always is when you first read that sentence, were you immediately convinced? Or do you need a good deal more proof, a good deal more convincing? When I read it, thinking back on the movie, I was like, yeah, I could see that. Which is our way, like we talked about in class, of saying that it's kind of banal. I'm not saying it's not worth mentioning here in the introduction, but the point I'm making to you here is it's not much worth pursuing, which we will talk about. I want to table that, but any kind of argument that is something to the effect of this character is very masculine, 98% of the time is not worth pursuing because it's obvious. Think back to, I think it was our last video. It was last week. I can't remember if it was the last one or not. But the one about Ron Swanson. Those of you who watched that little video I posted, all the clips, sort of the highlights from Ron Swanson, he's ridiculous, but he's ridiculously masculine. Like, he's so over the top. At no point would you want that student to spend any amount of time in their paper saying, look at how masculine this character is. Like, yeah, he is. We know. So you got to do something more than that. Now, the good news is we don't spend much time on that. Okay, great. The bad news is we really only have one other sort of argumentative moment. And so to circle all the way back to, I feel like this introduction is underdeveloped, that's where it's underdeveloped. We have some plot in here, we have some observation in here, and like all of that's mostly fine, I guess. But we definitely need a good deal more argument, not just when it comes to the thesis, but when it comes to the roadmap, right? Like leading up to that thesis, we need to sort of break down another way to consider all of this. Why is this movie worth thinking about? Like, one way to think about these papers is, any paper you write in a class like this, you're sort of bringing this argument to somebody and you're saying, this is worth your time. This is worth you thinking over. So what do we come up with? Well, in our thesis, we say, that technically it's 2 sentences, but again, a lot of it is summary. The ship begins to sink. You know, Kaladin goes to look for a lifeboat. Jack wants to rescue Rose. That's all the summary, which, like, I feel like we do that a lot quicker because you also need to treat these papers like your audience is familiar with the film or familiar with the text. But anyway, so our thesis here, although Kaladin presents society's perfect masculine traits, we have not proven that, first of all, in the introduction. That's a hell of an assumption. I'm not sure I buy that, even if they were to try to, that's a hard sell. But although that, Jack ends up being the real man in the end due to his sacrifice for Rose. That is a very loaded phrase, real man. My question to you is, do they explain what that means anywhere in the introduction? No, they don't. There are some implications there, especially with the due to his sacrifice, but they're asking us as readers to do the work there, okay? What they need to do in their introduction, but then of course in their paper, to the best of their ability, what do they mean by that? Instead of saying real man, what does sacrifice have to do with that? What does Rose have to do with that? It seems like she's important for some reason to their definition, right? And again, I'm making some guesses. I assume you are as well, but it's not on the page. It's not. And when it comes to what you guys care about, which is grades, I can only work with what's on the page. I can't go off of what I hope you're meaning or I hope you're trying to say, right? You got to write it down for me. But okay, what could they be talking about? Well, let's tease out the concerns they sort of highlight. They oppose, as the film does, Kaladin and Jack Dawson, okay? Jack Dawson good, Kaladin bad. It's pretty overt throughout the movie. Kaladin's a rich guy. I'm pretty sure he's in first class. Jack Dawson is like below decks in the ship, and that's part of the love story throughout the movie, is like Rose is from this other world and she's like slumming it when she's with him, but like she likes it with him. And the first question you have to ask is why? They kind of get at that in the body paragraph, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But suffice to say that it seems like Rose is maybe freer when she's with Jack. Now, of course, the movie is like, well, it's because they're in love, and like maybe they know each other for 3 days. That's the cheesy part of love movies, okay? You just got to kind of take that. Love stories, that's just with the territory. But something we could really dig into is maybe more worthwhile. What else is different about Jack and what he offers her? Because to hear our author tell it here, it doesn't seem like much, right? Kaladin, he offers something, you know what I'm saying? Like he's got money. But maybe that's part of the problem. Like the world that Rose is from, keep in mind, this is a period piece. It's the early 20th century. Women's rights, not a huge concern for a lot of people. A lot of people feel like women aren't really equal, that sort of thing. But especially in upper sort of crust society, it seems like one argument the film is making is for all of maybe the wealth that Rose comes from, right? It's also a kind of a prison. So when she's with Jack, he not only does he not hold her prisoner in the way that Kaladin might in the world that Kaladin represents, but he can't. He can't afford to, right? He can't hem her in that way, and so she's freed when she's around that guy, when she's around all those people, right? It's not just him. She seems to sort of come alive when she's just in that world, which is important. And that brings me to this question of like real man. What I think, and again, this is sort of on the page and sort of not. This is that underdeveloped problem. What I think the student is trying to say is we assume Kaladin is the real man. Also, I assume I'm saying that correctly. Kaladin? Anyway, we assume that guy is a real man because he has money. Sure, that the ability to provide, like we've talked about, that's part of the definition. We do have that. We absolutely had that at the turn of the 20th century. So one thing the film might be saying, and again, I think this is what our student is saying, it's not explained maybe as much as it could be, that part of what the movie is interested in is highlighting the evolution of this definition of masculinity, right? When the events of the Titanic went down in 1913? 1919? I'm hardcore using my memory right now. That's very close. Whenever that was, you kind of get the sense that the Titanic as a movie, which came out in the 1990s, is saying, look, this is how the world was. Dudes like Kaladin were seen as like the height of masculinity for like different reasons. He's white and rich and whatever. Okay, authoritative, I guess. Sure, he has a gun. Anyway, but we're making the movie almost a century later, so you could begin to argue, well, they're sort of taking the values from that original era and translating them to sort of be more in line with the era in which the film was produced, right? I think that's part of what they're trying to say with this real man. Like, so to translate all that, or maybe sum it up a little bit better, Kaladin is almost like a dinosaur. He's almost like a dying breed of masculinity, where you would think his wealth and everything that comes with it is really all that's required. But then in the end, you know, that's kind of questioned or something. That's one idea that's kind of up on the shelf that they're working with, okay? Another idea they have, because we got to deal with Jack. It seems like they're very interested in him. I don't know if he's the main character. I feel like Rose might be the main character. But anyway, that's kind of interesting, actually. You have these two guys fighting over a woman. Traditionally, she would kind of be in the background, but we kind of follow her throughout the movie. Anyway, how are these guys really opposed? At the end of the introduction, we make the point, what does Kaladin do and what does Jack do? What are their motivations? Well, it's a love story. Jack is motivated by love, and it's like, and then she won't let him on the door, and you know, all that stuff. What is Kaladin's motivation? He's the bad guy, right? So what we are saying, both in the introduction and really in the movie, is that what he does is somehow wrong, right? We're kind of passing that judgment on him. What is his motivation? Saving his own fucking life is his motivation. I get what the student is saying, first of all. I'm not saying that they're wrong necessarily in terms of like how we think about these definitions, but it is an interesting definition, right? Like, in a situation like this where the ship's going down and again, if you've seen the movie or if you can just imagine a horrific shipwreck where a lot of people die, and you could be one of them because you're on the ship, we are knocking this guy hard for trying to save himself. The only point I'm making here is that's a really natural thing to do, right? And it's interesting that as a society, right, millions of people went to see this movie a lot of times. This is one of the first movies I can remember because, again, I was a kid when it came out. It was news. I think you guys might have been around for the Batman movies. Like, people would go to see these movies 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 10 times, right? For some reason. So people really liked the story that the rich guy is a complete jerk, which he is in a lot of the movie. I'm not disputing that. And then in the end, you find out he's a real jerk because he doesn't want to drown. That's really interesting. So what do I mean by that? Well, this gets back to real man. We got to define that. We got to the best of our ability, both throughout the paper and in the introduction, let's go ahead and take a shot. What do we mean by that? Well, if we're trying to build that definition, one point that we have already started to make is that wealth is not required. And at least compared to the early 20th century, that's true. It's much less required, right? These days. Okay. But what else? If they're going to use an all those statement, and I'm already thinking about another video I'm going to make for you guys that really concentrates on that. I know I keep harping on this to you guys, but they are useful, and they do try one here, which I appreciate. Our banal claim is not Kaladin is this perfect sort of depiction of masculinity. I don't think that's true. To me, the banal claim is this question of wealth, right? Basically what I'm saying, we got to get more specific. So something like, although Kaladin being the wealthier of the two would seem to be the more masculine, right? Like that's basically what they're saying, but it's more specific, okay? Comma. We find out wealth isn't what's important in the movie, isn't what's important when it comes to defining a masculine character, okay? There'd be a period there, and then the key here, and again, underdeveloped, now we need more to that thesis. What I think is interesting, at least with what they've given us, what seems most important in the movie are two things. Allowing the woman, because again, we're talking about heteronormative relationships, which even in 2020, in a lot of ways, is how we define things like femininity and masculinity. They could talk about that in the paper, they don't have to. By the way, if anyone doesn't know what I'm just talking about, we still have this idea that it has to be a man and a woman, right? Like any sort of deviation from that narrative all of a sudden presents problems according to our definitions. I'm not saying that's how it should be. I'm saying that's something we're still dealing with, but we're definitely dealing with it in the 90s. But my point is, what makes Jack a real man? In that second sentence of the thesis, it comes down to two things. Who he is, both maybe as a person, but also the world he's from, allows Rose much more freedom as an individual. Like it's super progressive when you think about when the movie is set, how he approaches her and how he treats her. So we're, I think, very clearly in the movie saying, well, that's pretty important. If we're gonna think about masculine traits or definitions or anything like that, right? It's this understanding that a woman can be herself and not be necessarily subservient, something like that, okay? That's part of it. The other part, though, which I like a lot, is that Jack dies. We got to deal with that. The way they set up the introduction, that's basically what, because Kaladin won't die for her, he's less of a man. That's what we're saying. And I don't know that I disagree that that's what the film is saying. That's pretty wild. That's a wild part of the definition, right? So another way to totally consider the although statement could even be something like, although much of the film is very progressive, especially when you consider the era that it's depicting, the primary love interests embody like this progressive, you know, basically equal, I guess, relationship between a man and a woman, which is very interesting. Although that, because again, if you saw the movie, that would be pretty clear. After that comma is something about how we still can't shrug off these really old, I would argue, antiquated ideas. Like, I'll put it to you this way, okay? And then I'll move on to the body paragraph, I promise. Feminism is a dirty word for some people, but that's only because they don't know what it means. Feminism means, like classically speaking, people have taken this in different directions since then, but it just means equal, like men and women being equal, okay? But that means in all respects, and this is where it gets tricky for some people. So for instance, in most of the movie, this is our although statement, Jack and Rose are equal. And they are. And that's kind of what's so lovely about the love story. Again, especially thinking of the setting. Kaladin, you get the impression, very much not equal in terms of how he views Rose and what their life together would be if they had one. And you very clearly get the sense that Jack is very different, right? And they wouldn't have as much money, but they'd be richer in a different way, right? Very kind of corny, but true. So it's kind of feminist in that way. But in the end, that's not a feminist ending. She gets the door, he gets the ocean floor, right? That's not equality. It's not. That's women and children first, right? Which we have because it's a very old phrase, a very old idea from a very old time back when women and children weren't considered equal. So it's kind of funny that Jack is a real man in one way, according to these new ideas, right? Mostly centered around wealth or power, something like that, okay? Ability to provide or whatever. But at the same time, we haven't gotten rid of all these old ideas, and I would argue, if I were writing the paper, that one interesting sort of unintentional consequence of those old ideas of hanging on to them is that they actually sort of cut the knees out of this like feminist narrative. The very end of the movie, all of a sudden, all the work that they've done for Rose as a character, it gets a little muddied. It's not quite as, like, if they were equal, they'd either both be on the door or they'd both be in the water, is one argument you could begin to make, right? So it's kind of funny that by the end they revert back to this super old type, this super old narrative that Jack then has to die for. All right, so last thing I want to talk to you about, I spent a lot of time in the introduction, but that's because we're talking about thesis statements, we're talking about argument today. This whole week I'm going to be focused on argument, by the way. I can't stress this enough. If you do not have an argument, it's just, you're not going to do well, man. So you really got to focus on claims, and then number two, are they banal claims, which you guys sometimes struggle with. If you get past all that, the final sort of hurdle would be number three, am I proving this stuff? Do I have more to say? Do I need to maybe better define my terms? Something like real man. What the hell does that mean, right? All right. Last thing we're going to do today in today's video, the very last paragraph here is a body paragraph. As we always say, think of those three eyes, if that helps you sort of navigate this guy. But again, I'm just interested in argument. Where are we making arguments and how are we proving them? Okay, take a minute. I'll let you pause here. Okay, I assume, again, you went and did that. I hope so. So what did you find? What's our argument? Now, hopefully, again, it would be in the first sentence. Our topic sentence should be a claim. What do we have? Starting off, it can be said that a wealthy man who can provide for his woman is looked at as masculine. So we don't even talk about the text in the topic sentence. That's a problem. We very quickly get to the text, which is good. I would say number one, talk about the text throughout the paper. That includes topic sentences. Bear in mind, if your topic sentence is supposed to be your main idea of the paragraph, ideally, your main idea would somehow focus on that text, right? And if it doesn't, you have a bigger problem. But we very quickly move to the text. We're talking a lot about these two guys. We're spending a lot of real estate to talk about how Caledon is wealthier. We know that. Again, the point I'm making here is if all you're going to prove, and I'm not saying that's what we're necessarily doing, but in the first half of this paragraph we absolutely are. If all you're going to do is prove Caledon has more money than Jack, that's not worth your time. We know that. 5 minutes into the movie, we know that. It's just not, it's not worth it, man. So what do we do in the second half? Well, we do a couple things. Number one, we shift gears. All of a sudden, we're going to talk about Rose instead, which I'm cool with. Again, I would say she's probably the main character, actually. My issue, though, is we don't provide any evidence. We have a really interesting quotation from an outside source, which I like. I think it could be better contextualized, that quotation. There's another problem with it I'm going to talk about in a second. But the first point I want to make to you, go back and look at this paragraph. And if it helps, bear in mind that, let me see, where could we start? We could lose everything. The sentence beginning, Jack's character proves, if you took out that sentence and every sentence before it. that's all the stuff about how Kaladin is wealthier than Jack and X. Like, it's not that helpful, I don't think. At least right now. I'm going to talk about in a minute how it could be maybe salvaged, but I'm not saying delete it, but maybe cut it and move it to the side for what we have left. Because it seems like what we actually wanted to talk about is Rose. We have a really good quotation from the secondary source. When I say I would like better context, what I mean is in this guy's paper, David Gerstner, I want to know why, like at what point in the paper, at what point in his ideas is he talking about the Titanic as a training ground for Rose, where like how do we get to that idea? We need a little bit of a scene setting, okay? But anyway, the bigger issue here, two issues. I said already, we don't have any evidence for, like, that we've provided. If we're going to talk about Rose somehow in terms of her domestic past, her ability to see a way out, whatever that means, right? What are we looking at? What are you showing me? Keep in mind, I know that's aggressive, I apologize. Keep in mind, the way we describe this paper in class is, paper 2 was Destiny's Child, right? You're part of an ensemble. Paper 3, you're Beyonce. All these other motherfuckers are background dancers or backup singers, right? Like, they're supporting your ideas, which means you need to have ideas first. We don't have anything here. I'm hardcore using my memory here. I might have been single digits when that movie came out. Like, if we're going to talk about what is essentially what we're doing, we're trying to get at this idea that I mentioned earlier. Rose is somehow trapped by the world that she's from, right? Again, you very much get the sense that if she were to stay in that world with Kaladin and live that way, she'd probably have a sick ass house and all this really cool stuff, but as a person, she would be pretty stifled. She would only have probably very set things that she could do, and very set ways that she could behave. Do you know what I'm saying? So we're trying to somehow talk about that. Now, I would imagine, just with how these stories work, there's got to be a scene early in the movie where Rose and Kaladin interact with each other. He basically says something like, oh, you're lucky you're pretty. You know, or like some like, especially here in 2020 when we would watch it and be like, can't believe he just said that, right? There's got to be something like that that helps us prove, right? If we're writing this paper, that the world Rose is from, there's a problem with it. It stifles her in some way, and we're going to talk about how that is, right? We have to do that first. Once we do that, then we can bring in Gerstner. Has a lot of consonants right together. We can bring that guy in, we can bring that quotation in, and we can use it to further make our point, or add to it, or what have you, right? The second issue with that quotation, it arrives so late in this body paragraph, we don't do much with it. And we do what I call shoehorning. A lot of you probably don't know what a shoehorn is, but it's a long thing. It's mostly for old people or people that are injured. When you can't reach your shoes anymore, this happens to some folks, so strap in for life. But you can't really reach your shoes anymore, and it's to help you wedge your foot into your shoe. It's a little thing that you use. My grandmother had one. When you're shoehorning evidence in, what that means is you're really forcing it to fit whatever your preconceived idea was. And usually when you do that, it doesn't go well. So what do I mean by that? Look back at this quotation. The Titanic, and it's kind of a long quotation too, by the way, we could probably trim it, but the Titanic, the movie, is a training ground for Rose where the weight of her domestic past, so we're going to take it slow, the weight of Rose's domestic past, the world she's from, the responsibilities she's saddled with domestically. I assume we all know what that means, especially when it comes to women, okay? Puts at risk her own ability to see, as Jack promises, a way out. She can't see, I'm assuming, like a way to escape that world or those expectations, those rules, because of the fact that she's trapped by it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that seems like that's what we're saying there. Second sentence. I gotta find. It is on the ship where she is modeled and exercised into the dream of a man. So you guys may not be super clear on that second sentence. That's an interesting thought this guy has, but whether or not you can parse exactly what he means, what is he talking about? Who is he talking about? It is on the ship where she is modeled and exercised into the dream of a man. Who's the subject of that sentence? She is. It's Rose. So we're saying something about Rose here. Now, what do we say after the quotation? We're going to engage with it here. We have some kind of an idea. What do we say? Gerstner describes Jack as a dream of a man. No, he does not. No. He's not in that sentence. We're not talking about him. Contradicting the beginning perception of Jack being less man. This is what I mean by shoehorning. You guys get so dialed in on what you assume your argument should be, or how you assume something should be read, that you will oftentimes, as we do here, fundamentally misread a text. Gerstner is not talking about Jack. He's talking about Rose. And we miss it entirely because we're so focused on what we think we want to say, okay? You have to the best of your ability, take this evidence more honestly, okay? Now, very quickly, and then we'll be done, okay? I promise. I know this is long for some of you. He says an interesting thing. It is on the ship where she is modeled and exercised into the dream of a man. Now, without better context, I do have to guess a little bit. But if you're modeling and exercising a woman into the dream of a man, I read that as on this ship, she's being shaped to fit basically what a man thinks a woman should be. That's what it sounds like he's saying. Now, I would imagine he has more to say about it, and maybe later in the film things change for her. I've not read the paper from this Gerstner guy, but that's kind of interesting. I think what he's saying is when her trip starts out, she if my memory serves, she gets on with Kaladin. She's kind of a part of that party, that world, and that world extends onto the ship, at least in first class. And so when she's there, it's almost like she's making this voyage, and the initial aim of her being on the ship as part of that world is to be, as this guy says, modeled and exercised, is to be shaped into a proper woman, right? So the first sentence is saying, look, Jack recognizes what's happening to her on the ship, and he's saying, man, you don't realize how trapped you are, and you don't realize that you can get out. Gerstner doubles down basically and says, yeah, her whole reason for being on the ship is to be further trapped, to be modeled in such a way, shaped in such a way that she could maybe never get out, right? Because she'd be such a part of that world. We don't talk about any of that because we're working so hard for what we thought we wanted to say, okay? So, recap everything very quickly and then we're done. You got to have arguments. You got to. Look for banal claims. Stuff that doesn't really require proof. I'm not saying you can't ever have those, but I am saying you don't need to spend any time on them, and you absolutely can't stop the conversation there. You have to push past them. You have to. Secondly, what requires further explanation or definition? Real man, stuff like that, okay? And then last, to the best of your ability, you have to, number one, provide evidence on your own. You got to show me, give me an idea you have, and then show me something from the text that you're going to use to talk to me, to explain to me why that idea is valid, okay? We don't really do that in this paragraph. And then lastly, especially when it comes to outside sources, but even when it comes to citing evidence from your primary text, again, as best you can, just try to stay honest. I have theories as to why, but I think a lot of the time you guys are trained to think an argument is an argument as long as you can like make it forcefully. That's not true. That's like all the way like, thousands of years back to the beginning of argument as we understand it. That's not true. And you get yourself into trouble when you're doing that. So worst case scenario, even if you have an idea and you pull some evidence and you start writing about it and thinking about it, and by the end of the paragraph you realize, oh shit, I was wrong. That's fine. You just go change some stuff. You figured something out. That's really cool, right? If you can convince yourself, chances are good you can convince me. You know what I'm saying? So you just you gotta really work against that initial reading, that initial idea that like I am absolutely correct all the time and here we go, right? Because that is so often not the case, especially in papers like this. Sorry this one was a little long, but hopefully it's helpful. As always, if you guys want feedback or thoughts or you want to talk to me about something, you can hit me up. Many of you are. And yeah, I hope everyone's well. I'll catch you later. Thanks.